Martin, the game director of Victoria 3, tweeted a couple of days ago that Dev Diaries would be starting up again to talk about fixes, improvements and change coming to Victoria's 1.2 patch, and that is exactly what we heard today. The first update of the year, and it's a big one, and honestly I think quite an interesting one. Also, to tide us over, Martin tweeted a picture of this condensed trade route interface that we won't be talking about today, although it does look nice, and I gave him a like for that. You might want to consider doing the same on this video, but hold your applause, let's wait and see. Today's Dev Diary talked about autonomous investment, but more importantly, of course, it talked about Victoria's 1.2 patch, the second major update coming to Victoria 3 at some point soon, TM. And of course, we received the patch 1.1 update last year, so it is also the first major update of 2023. And patch 1.2 is addressed at the start of the developer's diary, saying that it will be the next major update, and as with 1.1, it'll contain bug fixes, user interface improvements, AI improvements, and so forth. But there will also be gameplay changes, and that is of course where the real big news is, the meaty changes to Victoria 3. And today's change is autonomous investment, and it's one that sounds kind of nerdy, and it probably is, but I'm really interested in this one. Autonomous investment, of course, referring to investment that's happening in the country's economy autonomously. That is, without you or I, the player, or maybe an AI player playing against us at the nation level, making. How does it happen by itself? You might be wondering. If you are, this is the video for you. If you're already kind of across it, this is also, spoiler alert, the video for you. There's some juicy detail in here about how autonomous investment will work in Victoria 3. Something that's important to address up front is that they've acknowledged that this may not be something that the community is collectively excited for. It may be split somewhat. And so to get around that, they're adding in a new game rule for the autonomous investment feature. It'll be enabled by default, and that will put the investment pool out of the hands of the player. But you can also choose to disable it, which will put that investment pool of cash back into the player's hand and make it work exactly as it always has. If you're wondering what that investment pool is, of course, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. We've got all of the details that you'll need. The pool of money itself that makes up the investment pool works pretty much the same way as it always has, but patch 1.2 will, of course, do something a little bit differently. In fact, a few key differences. The way it's worked previously is that certain population types, like the capitalists for example, with ownership shares in buildings, pay a part of the dividends that they earn into what's called the investment pool, and those are funds which can be drawn on to construct buildings. Autonomous investment, of course, will then be referring to when the game can kind of do that itself. Let's discuss exactly how they plan to address that. So there are certain types of populations that will invest in the pool, and that's been expanded. Aristocrats and capitalists were always there, but now farmers and shopkeepers will throw their hat into the ring as well and try and invest their good fortunes. Capitalists will invest the most, 20% of their dividends. Aristocrats will do 10%, and the farmers and shopkeepers will do 5%. The idea behind that being that while the wealthiest in society invest, to a smaller degree others can do as well. Up until now, the amount of money that they invested into the investment pool was determined by your laws, your economic laws, and this led to some crazy things happening. The example that they mention is a whole load of radicals instantly being created because the money that they were investing as a percentage was more money than they were, and thus they ended up having less income, less wealth, and became, well, pretty frustrated about it, as you would. The game will now work it in patch 1.2 when it releases TBD, that is, so that it's a proportion of their income, as we discussed, 20% for the capitalists, to get around any weird scaling issues. They've also introduced a general bonus for small and medium-sized economies in reference to the investment pool, so that they'll get a general investment efficiency bonus, whereas large, sort of massive economies might see the opposite a little bit, to avoid some absurd proportionality taking place. And as you can see, there's an example of what agrarianism might look like as an economic system moving forward, where aristocrats, perhaps capitalists, contribute less than they would, and farmers are able to contribute much more than they normally would into the investment pool in an agrarian society. But of course, it's not just about putting money into it. The autonomous part of the investment actually comes in when we learn, okay, so how are these different interest groups going to be able to spend this money? How will the autonomous investment part actually play out? We've learned that the construction queue will be split into a private and government constructions, the two different sectors, of course, with the government constructions covering anything that you or I as a player has decided to build. Whether it's operating in the private sector or the public sector, that doesn't matter. Here, government construction or government building is referring to what you or I or a nation state, AI, might build. In this brain-spanking new construction capacity layout, the country will be split between those two queues based on your economic laws. So there's more at stake with the laws rather than just the interest group discussions that we were talking about earlier. More than that though, in the construction screen you'll also be able to see what the next planned private construction will be. In other words, that investment pool that we were talking about earlier that the farmers are throwing all of their free money into in an agrarian economy, what are they autonomously choosing to spend it on? We'll be able to see that in this new construction queue. The level of private funding that can go into these constructions is based on both the total funds available in the investment pool as well as the weekly funds coming into it, which can fluctuate based on market price and construction, so on and so forth. Once a project is ready, it'll be added to the queue with a tick, and private constructions, unlike government ones that you or I might schedule up to build, cannot be reprioritized or cancelled. It's the people's will, what the population are building after all. As this is autonomous investment, obviously there are pretty significant implications on the game's AI, another area that does definitely have some weaknesses, and they've addressed that in this developer diary. Let's take a look specifically at what they've said. They basically say that the AI does not take into account country-level AI strategic decisions when it's investing in the investment pool. In other words, it doesn't take into account what you or I might be building in terms of the AI player. So if the AI is playing as Spain, it's not taking into account what it needs from its investment pool and its national construction at the same time. However, it will prioritize the creation of profitable buildings, lucrative jobs, and that kind of thing. In terms of specific AI performance, they say, and I quote, "Together with a bunch of AI improvements and fixes in 1.2, this has resulted in more stable economic growth for AI countries and especially seems to have given Great Britain a boost, as the private sector doing its own thing means that the economy is usually growing even if the country's treasury is having issues, at least as long as the pops investing into private sector growth are making healthy profits." End quote. And I think that summarizes what they're trying to achieve by these changes. It's essentially creating a private economy. And you, of course, as the player, will still have agency over what laws are being passed and the structure of that economy, which populations are allowed or disallowed to work in it. But the idea is that a private economy can exist and that it will make rational and effective decisions. And according to this, that's what, so far at least, they've managed to achieve. And that is all for today's huge first news of the year for Victoria 3. I am honestly kind of excited about having a private sector economy that we can see and understand and feed into, pulling those sort of government action, those state level levers. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in terms of balance, and of course there are those AI ramifications as well. We'll have to wait and see when patch 1.2 launches. That's when these changes will be going live. And of course, I'll be sure to keep you right up to date right here with all sorts of Victoria 3 goodness and a myriad of other exciting strategy games too. Next week, we'll talk government shares and economic laws. Until next time, everybody, take care. I'll see you then.